Welcome to session 16. We're going to get started. Session 16 is The Future is Here, How to Handle DCD, NRP, and Xenotransplant. We would like to request that you hold your questions until all presentations have been delivered. At that time, we will open the floor to questions for any of the presenters. Our first presenter is Greg Diede. Greg is the Area Clinical Manager for Specialty Care, covering 11 hospitals, working alongside 13 surgeons and 11 staff perfusionists across the state of Arizona. He has spent the majority of his time, the last 16 years, based out of Phoenix at Banner University Medical Center. He is a graduate of Midwestern University in the class of 2017, and this year he is a member of our AMSAC Convention Planning Committee. A little fun fact about Greg: he was a member of a local rock band in Phoenix where he played the guitar. Please help me welcome Greg to the podium as he presents on DCD and NRP.
Thanks. I'll be signing autographs after this. So, we sold about 10 copies of our CD, so I'm sure you'll all be dying to see that. So yeah, good afternoon, everyone. I was as surprised as you are seeing me up here again for my last Thursday talk. I thought I'd be kicked out of here, but here I am, bringing you yet another fun and hopefully educating talk that a few of you may enjoy of how we handle NRP for DCD heart transplants in Phoenix. We have a great team here on the surface of the sun, although always attempting new and exciting treatments. We have completed over 100 heart transplants since our inaugural year in 2020. We are also now the #1 center in the world for total artificial hearts, quantity and quality, and even completed the first of our kind known to us, a TAH with a complete aortic arch repair with a frozen elephant trunk. Just doesn't get much better than that. And I can't brag enough about the work that our team is doing as a whole, and our perfusion team is lucky to be working with such talented and down-to-earth surgeons that make our lives that much easier. I have nothing to disclose at this time. Some objectives that we will be covering this afternoon will be a quick background and history of DCD and NRP, an overview of the equipment utilized to successfully perform NRP and the logistics of the whole thing, which can be one of the bigger hurdles, how we actually perform NRP, some of our experiences including problems and complications that we've run into, what kind of staffing model we had to adopt to our account, and then I'll end it with some discussion for the future of where this thing may be headed. I won't get into too much of the ethical dilemmas, and I'll have Dr. Cohen attack a little bit of that for me, but so background for DCD, if you haven't heard by now, this stands for donation after cardiac death with planned withdrawal, sometimes referred to as controlled DCD. The donor does not always meet the criteria of a DVD donation after brain death at that particular moment, but is on course for brain death such as coma, absent brain stem reflexes, and the ability to breathe without ventilatory support. So this is the part that could be a little morbid for some, but you obviously have to wait until the donor expires on their own. Declaration of death must be confirmed by a donor physician to avoid conflict of interest with the harvesting team, and the harvesting team is not allowed to touch the donor until 3 to 5 minutes after confirmed cardiopulmonary cessation by that donor facility physician. The withdrawal of ventilatory support can occur in the OR, the best case scenario for ischemic time and transport of the donor. Sometimes PACU pre-op and our ICU if it's nearby the operating room. Our team typically will wait about 60 to 90 minutes for the donor to expire, depending on who's giving us the commands back at home base, but really any time over 60 minutes is at risk for heightened ischemia. During this time, the harvesting team is not allowed to be in the same room as the donor and relies on staff from the Organ Procurement Organization, or the OPO, to give updates on donor vitals and status. Which then leads us to NRP, which stands for Normothermic Regional Perfusion. NRP is useful in DCD by providing warm oxygenated blood to the heart and abdominal organs that allows for their reanimation while reducing myocardial injury, promoting energy storage, and maintaining homeostasis. It is also allows the surgeons to assess the organ under direct visualization. A little brief history on DCD. The first adult human-to-human transplant by Christian Barnard in 1967 was procured after cardiac and circulatory arrest. An NRP method was likely used, as one article stated that upon medical examiner's pronouncement of donor death, Barnard's assistants then rapidly opened the chest, initiated pump oxygenator support, cooled the heart to a low temperature, and excised it. As soon as the news spread about Barnard's DCD transplant, the United States quickly put in place criteria for what is classified as brain death, and DCD for hearts was not revisited for quite some time. The use of DCD and NRP was not seen again for adults until 2008 in the UK, and the US did not utilize DCD in adults until 2019 when Duke first transplanted a DCD heart from an OCS system. After we started our heart transplant program in 2020, we have successfully performed our first DCD with NRP approximately 2 years later. All right, enough with all the boring stuff. Let's get down to business on the perfusion equipment that we utilize for NRP. Currently, we are using our trusty Medtronic bioconsole that I'm sure you all have lying around somewhere in a closet at your hospital, if not already in your normal rotation. We also have a special sprinter cart from a company called CoreSight that fits the Biomedicus perfectly with a small footprint. The small accessory table line tray ended up being a savior that we found in a pile of our old holders and attachments, which allows us to push the circuit up to the operating table with a small sterile field holding our lines that the scrub can easily grab. To achieve the normothermic part of NRP, no more Dr. Evil memes this time, I promise, but we use a microtemp LT heater by Cincinnati Sub-Zero. It's not the most efficient, but it gets the job done and is very compact. We also bring our own iStat point-of-care machine so we can do our best to rely on ourselves and not the donor facility. With that being said, we do obviously rely on the donor facility for oxygen to the circuit, which we have simplified and just used 100% O2 supply from the mass port on the anesthesia machine. Here's a shot of our setup at a donor facility prior to donor withdrawal. Everything's ready for action. You can see the oxygen line coming off the left side of the circuit that attaches to the anesthesia machine. Just in the perfect spot to trip the surgeon. You know, they always love that kind of stuff. And the sprinter cart is really ideal for this procedure, although the fifth leg coming off the side of it's a bit of a pain to deal with when you're attempting to stuff it into small cubbies of an airplane. Here's a picture of our exposed backside, highlighting the small sterile field on the tray that contains our sterile AV loop and venous cannula, which we'll discuss later. So for disposables, we use the Medtronic tubing packs and Fusion oxygenators, as I'm sure you've already gathered from the previous pictures. We mostly bring 2 sets of everything other than tubing packs and oxy reservoirs due to the size of the containers. So we just hope and pray that they work properly out of the container and that nothing ever happens to them during transport. This is a list of some extra supplies that we bring along in the backpack that is always stocked and ready to go. We have a laminated checklist that lists each item as well as equipment and main disposables that resides in the backpack that we are sure to double check before leaving our home hospital. Our lovely surgical technologists also have their own checklist and list of supplies that they are responsible for. Here we are again, hoping and praying that no one drops a cannula. They also have a list of supplies that they request from the donor facilities, such as the sternal saw, as well as various sutures and other basic materials that any OR should have on hand. Now here's a quick nausea-inducing video of a practice circuit that we set up for training our perfusionists. This was before we started utilizing the table tray and the AV loop for the AV loop and did not hook up the heater at this time. Now into the logistics. The harvest team, typically consisting of a surgeon, assistant, perfusionist, scrub tech, and procurement specialist, all need to be transported from your home hospital to the airport or straight to the donor facility if it is local. If air travel is necessary, you need someone to pick you up from the airport to successfully transfer you to the donor facilities. Sometimes they get lost on the way, it happens. Then if you actually procured a heart, it's time to hightail it in the reverse order. Most of the times we travel in 2 different vehicles that allows one part of the team to either head straight to our home hospital as quick as possible without waiting on any stragglers, or if out of town, those who are no longer a part of the actual procurement part can start loading up and head to the airport to pack and be ready for liftoff as soon as the heart arrives. We also do our best to arrive at the donor facility approximately 1 hour prior to planned withdrawal of the donor in order to set up the OR and set up and prime the NRP circuit. This is the typical suburban style vehicle that picks us up from each hospital. But what you really want and pray that shows up is something like this bad boy, a Mercedes Sprinter van that has plenty of room for all your equipment without having to use separate vehicles or play Tetris with your equipment. You can even get the Sprinter cart to stand upright in the back. Sometimes it's just the little things. The company that is contracted to transport us is very accommodating and helpful. They always have a cooler loaded with drinks, snacks, and will even order you takeout typically on the flight or drive to your home hospital. Here's a shot of our Pelican flight case, keeping all of our precious hardware safe and sound, packed tightly with foam. Although on the way home, it doesn't always look this neat when you're rushing to tear down and pack up because you either have a heart that's ready to roll or an impatient team member is ready to rush out because the donor failed to expire within the allotted time. Here's a picture of all the perfusion-related equipment and disposables ready to be taken down in the ambulance bay. All right, after all that fun, we finally made it to the operating room. If the donor withdrawal was in the OR, the harvest team is waiting in the substerile area outside of the OR with the surgeon and assistant already gowned and gloved. If the donor withdrawal was somewhere else, the harvest team usually waits in the OR for the donor to be brought in after they have been declared. Each hospital has their own protocols to where they want withdrawal to be in conjunction with the family's wishes. Sometimes they even have allowed us to prep, drape, and hand off table lines before withdrawal, which really streamlines the process. Once the donor has expired, the appropriate time has passed, and the donor is prepped and draped, incision is made all the way down to the sternum, and sternotomy is performed. Care is then taken to quickly find the head vessels and clamp them off prior to cannulation, so there is no question of any possible donor awareness. Then a stab incision is made into the aorta and 18 French arterial cannula is inserted. Using a bulb syringe, the cannula is quickly de-aired and the arterial line is connected. Another stab incision into the right atrium is performed in order to insert a 36 French single-stage venous cannula that is already connected to the venous line. During this hectic time, our current setup makes it easy to push up to the table in one motion and to edge the tray of sterile tubing towards the scrub tech without having to worry about pushing a separate table or opening a sterile pack to the scrub. Once the cannulas are in, it's time to crash on bypass and begin to resuscitate and reverse that black blood. With our more experienced NRP harvest team, we can be on bypass within 3 minutes after the approximate 3-minute no-touch time, even when the donor is coming from outside of the operating room. During this time, anesthesia from the donor facility, or if you're able to con one of your anesthesia buddies from home to tag along with you, attempts to re-intubate the donor. Reintubation is key if you want to get off pump quickly, especially if they are turning down the heart. More to come on this. Here's a shot of our scrub techs in action, prepping the lines and attaching the venous cannula to the venous line in preparation for that quick stab incision. For prime drugs, we use the basic drugs that we use for any CPB case, except we add an extra amp of bicarb and extra 20,000 units of heparin. Although the donor was given 30,000 units of heparin prior to withdrawal, I don't always trust how, when, and where it was given. Also, a significant amount of time could have passed since it was administered, so it's always a good idea to CYA and make up for any previous shortcomings that may have occurred since going on pump. So some may scoff at me for possible reperfusion injury, but we've had good luck going on with high sweep gas and obvious 100% FiO2 from the anesthesia accessory port. For blood flow, we target a typical index of 2.4. Once things have calmed down a little and the cannulas are secured, it's time to get ACT as soon as you can. Once the venous blood color is looking better, it is then a good time to grab a blood gas and see how well you guessed on your settings. I usually get a gas approximately 10 minutes from the initiation if all's going well. The pump runs themselves aren't too long, and if they are, that usually means they're questioning the viability of the heart. If it is decided that the heart will be procured, you will start to wean and transfuse as much volume as possible so you can tear down quickly once you've terminated, so you don't have to continue to transfuse once you're off. The surgeon likes you to give volume if needed, but also wants your butt out the door ASAP so they're not waiting on you to cross clamp. One of those many times where you just can't win. Here we are in the thick of things. So since February of 2020, we've been a part of 23 DCDs with planned withdrawal and NRP anticipation. 11 had failed to arrest during the allotted time, and 7 of the 12 have been successfully transplanted, which should be current data as of now. I've personally been a part of 10 of the 23 cases with 5 failures to expire, 5 expired cases, and 3 hearts actually procured. The joke was that we were always coming home empty-handed if I was involved. I was the opposite of the Grim Reaper, I guess. The hearts that were turned down that I was a part of was due to probably being a little new to the game and attempting to procure anything that was offered to us, as well as not requesting enough diagnostic tests on some of the donors that we probably should have. In fairness to my knowledge, the donor hospital has to front the cost of all diagnostic tests performed on a donor, so there is typically some pushback on what tests they will actually perform. One donor was involved in an MVA with no myocardial hematoma that we assessed after resuscitation that was deemed non-viable after reanimation. The other donor that was denied after reanimation was a younger male in his early 30s that ended up having multiple surprising coronary lesions that no one was expecting at that age. We have since been stricter on who we will consider for DCD and push harder for more diagnostic tests before deployment of the team. So some of the complications that we've come across more than once are arterial line malfunction, cannula dislodgement, and the inability to reintubate. Arterial line malfunction is the one thing you can just almost always assume is going to happen, especially if the donor is being moved rapidly from a gurney to the operating table. It either dampens beyond use or anesthesia can't even find the transducer because it's likely underneath the donor. We just got in the habit of transducing the central aortic pressure from the cardioplegia cannula once the arterial line and venous cannulas are secured. Which brings me to my next favorite pastime, cannula dislodgement. As you can imagine, the situation is pretty hectic in the beginning after the donor expires, but the most important job of the assist at this point is to not let go of the cannulas. I've had 2 different instances now where a thoracic surgeon waiting to procure the lungs decided to assist our CT surgeon, who just assumed he could let go of the arterial cannula before it was secured, and a CT fellow who decided to let go of the arterial cannula before securement, which in the scramble to control the flailing line pulled out the venous cannula as well. Another annoying complication arises when anesthesia is unable to reintubate. It may not seem like a big deal while you're on pump, but over time the abdominal team starts to notice how well their transplanted organs fare after NRP. So needless to say, if you cannot reintubate and the heart is not being procured for whatever reason, the abdominal team will kindly ask you to stay on pump for as long as it takes to procure their selected organs. On to staffing. Let's start with the most appealing aspect that anybody on any team will love. Another call position, yay, because we don't take enough call already. Obviously, another call position has to be created considering one perfusionist must be with the potential recipient of the organ and the other perfusionist will be going along for their procurement. We treat the NRP person as a backup call position, so they rarely get called for actual emergencies on nights or weekends, and you typically get plenty of heads up before a potential DCD procurement. Performing NRP is not very difficult under relaxed controlled conditions, but for the most part they are high intensity cases, especially in the beginning, and the surgeons need to be able to rely on the perfusionist to be able to adapt to high pressure and unfamiliar situations. I tell my staff who are attempting to train for NRP that pumping the case is the easy part. It's making sure you're prepared for any scenario that can come along at any period. For instance, making sure you have all of your equipment and disposables before leaving your home hospital for starters. Also making sure you're capable of properly loading and handling all the equipment into various vehicles and finagling that equipment into small aircraft without any snafus. Lastly, adapting to different environments and operating rooms that you may come across at other donor sites. On the topic of inexperience, it proves difficult to train and precept others during DCDs considering seating is limited in vehicles, especially with air travel, and all the weight and personnel must be accounted for each flight. The ladies on my team love when I ask how much they weigh, and also they seem to occur at times where the rest of the schedule is too busy to accommodate 2 people leaving on a flight, or if it's after hours and the team member may have prior obligations already. But if they really want to train to be able to perform NRP, they have to be willing to sacrifice non-call days to go on a potential procurement. Considering that we are contracted to work at this hospital and are not paid hourly, we have some nice incentives built in for going out on procurement, especially with the risk involved with flying. Some of our staff team members elect not to participate in NRP because of the fear of flying, but we have plenty of others who will gladly go instead, considering the substantial incentive pay involved. The final topic I'll touch on is the future, what the future may hold for DCD NRP. One challenge that we would like to overcome for the future would be a way to better determine which DCD donors are more likely to expire within the allotted time frame. As stated previously, we had 11 out of 23 total DCD runs that failed to expire, which wasted a lot of time and resources, not to mention giving hollow hope to a potential transplant recipient. With that being said, one of our surgeons is currently working with multiple neurologists in attempts to create a scoring protocol that could help guide the team's decision-making on which donors should expire the quickest. Artificial intelligence has also been discussed as another possible resource that could potentially aid in the selection of prime DCD donors. Femoral cannulation prior to withdrawal has also been brought up amongst our team as a way to expedite initiation of CPB and further decrease ischemic times, although I feel many ethical hurdles would have to be overcome considering the harvest team is not allowed to touch the donor prior to declaration of death. In Phoenix, we also utilize the TransMedics organ care system in certain situations, such as long distances. We recently completed our first OCS implant that was transported from over 2,000 miles away. Even though there is some competition between NRP and OCS, I do believe they can coexist together and both have their own niche within DCDs. Collaboration could consist of the utilization of NRP for the initial reanimation and direct visualization of organs without the risk of wasting costly OCS supplies before determination of a viable organ. Once the organ is deemed acceptable, it could then be transitioned to OCS for transport, especially over greater distances. This method could also decrease the time from donor circulation cessation to reanimation, considering we have observed some occurrences of lengthy time from harvest to OCS resuscitation that proved to be detrimental to previous viable tissue. More opportunities to perform NRP for abdominal DCDs are now seemingly becoming more popular. Once the abdominal surgeons observed DCD organs that had been perfused and resuscitated with NRP techniques, there was no denying the positive impact it made on harvested organs compared to only cold static storage. I'm hopeful the future will hold for further acceptance of DCD NRP from all of the medical community and general society that will allow us to increase our efforts of expanding the donor pool that is currently nowhere near meeting the demands of our current population with organ failure. Little shot of us. And I hope to see you all at the Sazerac House tonight at the social event this evening. It's a spectacular venue that the Conference Planning Committee and EWALD worked hard to secure, and I know you all will enjoy the museum, live music, getting to connect further with colleagues in the field, and of course, the drinks. And hopefully after last night, most of you are doing okay. I almost had to ask for my donated blood back from yesterday. And now for an exciting pre-recorded presentation on xenotransplantation from Dr. Moazami. We got a hefty intro here on him. Dr. Nadar Moazami is the Surgical Director of Heart Transplantation and Mechanical Circulatory Support from NYU Langone. Dr. Moazami is a graduate of Columbia University College of Physicians and Surgeons in New York. He served his internship and residency at Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center and completed a fellowship in cardiothoracic surgery at Cleveland Clinic in 2001. His major areas of focus have been in mechanical circulatory support and heart transplantation. A prolific researcher, Dr. Moazami has published more than 100 scientific articles in leading peer-reviewed journals. He has been the principal investigator on over 24 trials of new heart assist devices and other therapies for end-stage heart failure. Additionally, he serves as a reviewer for several of the heart and transplantation journals, is on the editorial board for the Annals of Thoracic Surgery. Dr. Moazami is a frequent speaker and instructor with more than 200 presentations and educational sessions to his credit. His professional memberships include the International Society for Heart and Lung Transplantation, Society of Thoracic Surgeons, Heart and Failure Society of America, the American Society for Artificial Internal Organs, and the American Association for Thoracic Surgery. His professional career has been dedicated to advancing the field of mechanical circulatory support and heart transplantation. Over the last 2 decades, he has been involved in the care and management of hundreds of patients with acute cardiogenic shock requiring mechanical temporary support, and has served as director of the cardiogenic shock programs at Washington University in St. Louis and the Cleveland Clinic Foundation. His most recent accomplishments are in the areas of expanding the donor pool for heart transplantation using NRP for DCD heart donations, use of hepatitis C donor hearts, and ethical aspects of NRP. In the summer of 2022, his team was the first in the world to complete pig-to-human xenotransplantation and two recently deceased recipients who donated their body to research.
Good afternoon, and thank you once again for the invitation to speak at this forum. And I sincerely apologize that I was not able to be present in person to give you this lecture. I was asked to talk a little bit today about the current status of xenotransplantation for cardiac transplantation. And I wanted to briefly review some of the data that we have available on this and where the future of xenotransplantation for the heart is going to look like. I have no disclosures. So I think that, as many of you know, xenotransplantation research has been over 3 decades in the laboratory. And there have been many advances that have been done in understanding exactly why xenotransplantation does not work, which is primarily related to the existence of antibodies against the xenoheart. However, today, research has really gone to the point that we are at the closest point that one would ever imagine in terms of actual clinical application of xenotransplantation for human use. And the reason for that really has been primarily because of the many advances that have been done in the basic sciences, in that pig cells can now be genetically manipulated in order to make them to be more resistant to the actions of the immune system. And also because over the many years, we now have novel immunosuppressive agents that can assist in controlling any rejection that may happen. So the question really is, are we really ready at this point to bring this to the clinical stage, and what are some of the interim steps that we need to take? So as I mentioned earlier, one of the biggest advances that have been made over the last decade has been the ability to really manipulate the genetics of the pig cell so that we could actually either remove certain genes or add additional genes in order to make it more compatible for human transplantation. In this particular case, what really has happened is that the somatic cell of the pig is removed and is genetically modified, and we're going to talk a little bit about what these genetic modifications are. This somatic cell that is genetically modified is infused with an empty pig egg cell, which is then allowed to replicate in the lab into a blastocyst, and then this is implanted into a surrogate pig that is ready to receive this implant. And the baby pig that is born then is going to have some of these genetic modifications that have been introduced into the cell. There are, however, certain concerns about the use of these pigs and whether or not this can clinically ever be applicable. And one of the reasons for this is that, as I showed you during that diagram, really at this point of time, every genetically modified pig that is created has to be done in a single fashion and in an individualized fashion.
Well,
Okay. Yeah, sing. I play guitar, remember, not singing.
go ahead with the next presenter.
Should we?
Should we go with the next presenter? Okay.
Sorry. All right, well, thank you, Dr. Moazami, for half of your presentation. We'll keep a watchful eye out on your progression in this field and progression in the video. Next up, we have Dr. Ari Cohen, that is solely here to explain to you that everything that I just mentioned in my presentation is ethically correct. But with all jokes aside, Dr. Ari Cohen is the director of Ochsner's Transplant Institute. Dr. Cohen did a surgical internship and residency at the University of Manitoba in Winnipeg, Canada, where he also received his medical degree. After completing his transplant surgical fellowship at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, Dr. Cohen joined the Multi-Organ Transplant Institute at Ochsner as a transplant surgeon specializing in abdominal surgery in 2002. Dr. Cohen is a fellow of the Royal College of Canada. He is also a professor of surgery at both the University of Queensland and Louisiana State University Health Sciences Center in Shreveport. Most recently, he completed his master's in business administration at Louisiana State University Health Sciences Center in Shreveport in the summer of 2023. And when Dr. Cohen is not implanting multiple organs, he's enjoying traveling the world and has set foot in every continent in the world with over 40 countries visited.
Thank you. I guess I get a little bit more extra time to present. The Ochsner Transplant Institute has a long-standing history of transplanting DCD organs, and specifically DCD liver transplants. And we historically have been one of the leaders in the fields for DCD organs. And we were actually kind of slow to adopt the whole issue of using NRP for DCD organs, because we were so aggressive doing it the traditional way that we didn't find a motivation to transition until recently. Our cardiothoracic teams are not quite there yet, so really we wanted to adopt abdominal transplantation, NRP first, and then we would add thoracoabdominal NRP when they were ready. And because there's some potential ethical issues surrounding NRP, my approach was to go to our ethics committee in our health system first and ask for permission instead of asking for forgiveness later. So this is kind of the presentation I gave our ethics committee. I then took it to our medical advisory committee. They were a little perplexed why I was going to them, because they're like, well, you don't normally come to us when you do a new procedure. And I said, yeah, but I want you to understand this, because if people come to you with questions, I want you to have heard this from me first before you're hearing it from somebody else. So this is kind of the presentation I gave others. I modified it just a little bit for you guys, but in general, this was kind of my approach to getting approval from our health system. I do have one disclosure. First, you really have to talk about the Uniform Declaration Death Act, which really is irreversible cessation of brain function or irreversible cessation of circulatory function. And then the other issue is the dead donor rule, which is that we're only going to do anything related to organ procurement after the donor is clearly dead. And those two things are going to hold true and are really important to our discussion. Transplantation, I'm sure many of you know, started back in the 50s. Dr. Starzl did the first liver transplant in the 60s, followed by heart transplants. Then Harvard came around with the brain death laws. And really, brain death donors were the way to go up until the 90s. And what happened was the number of people waiting for transplant became rapidly expanded. Now there's over 120,000 people waiting for transplant. And there's been this renewed push to do DCD organs. And right now, about a third of the organs that are occurring in the United States are DCDs. And that was kind of our motivation now to switch to doing NRP for our donors. So, when I gave this talk to the ethics committee and our medical advisory committee, they don't really understand what I'm talking about because they don't really do transplant and I speak a different language than others. So I kind of had to start with the basics, which is what a brain dead donor was, which I'm sure many of you in this room understand, but brain dead donor has, meets all the criteria for brain death. They often are moved to brain dead to donor centers, and we have a donor center here in Louisiana, so all of the brain dead donors in Louisiana are moved there. And that's not what I'm talking about. But I wanted to be clear what the difference was between a brain dead donor and a donation after cardiac death. So donation after cardiac death, the donor has an irreversible brain injury, but is not declarable. But the family wants to withdraw care, and the family wants their loved one to be an organ donor. We don't move these donors to a donor center in general. We may be doing that soon, but we don't do that because these people aren't dead. and they have to be cared for by a physician. We prepare the patient, hopefully in the operating room, sometimes it's in the pre-op area or in the recovery room, and then move the donor. But we withdraw care, we provide comfort to the donor, and then we allow them to expire. The transplant team cannot be in the room, as Greg had said, they have to stand outside, but we're ready to rush in and quickly remove the organs after the person's been declared dead. And then every hospital either has a 2 or a 5-minute waiting time to make sure there's no auto resuscitation. And really, so everyone in the room understands that we're separating the act of withdrawal of care from the act of donation. So what are the concerns? Well, during that time when the donor is having his care withdrawn, the donor is really kind of agonal. And depending on the declaring physician, that can be prolonged. And the organ, what we worry about is the organs can deteriorate. And historically, when they started doing DCDs again, in the early 90s, for liver transplants, the cholangiopathy rate, the injury to the bile ducts, was significant. And Ochsner actually became a world leader in this by reducing the cholangiopathy rate. We introduced 4 different things into our protocols to help reduce that, and we reduced our cholangiopathy rate to about 1%. I can't tell you which one of the 4 things really worked, so we were not willing to change any of those 4 things, but we still do that. But we have about an hour or to allow the donor to pass. For kidneys, we'll wait 60 to 90 minutes. For livers, some centers only wait 20 minutes. We wait at least 30 minutes. Rarely a pancreas is used. Rarely heart and lungs are used in the traditional fashion. OCS has allowed some hearts and lungs to be used, but not a lot of other organs were used in this way. So why do we want to change? So normothermic regional perfusion is really a modification. This has been widely adopted in Europe. They started doing this in about 2010. And is almost done for every DCD donor now in Europe. It's been slowly gaining traction in the last 3 or 4 years in the United States. It is rapidly expanding. It is expanding the utilization of organs. The waiting time might be a little bit longer. It's been shown to increase the yield of organs. It increases the quality of organs. It allows for functional testing to see if the risks are reasonable for our recipients. And it allows for the organs to be procured in a manner very similar to a brain-dead donor. It does require more education to the donor hospital and people. What I always worry about is the people walking down the hallway in the operating rooms who see that we're now putting a donor on an ECMO machine and they don't really understand what's going on there. So education is critical, and that's why I've been trying to talk about this up front as opposed to explaining this later on. And some hospitals have very strict policies for DCDs, and we need to adjust those policies to allow us to do this at every hospital. Basically, every organ has increased the yield of organs with normothermic regional perfusion. Normothermic regional perfusion has also improved the quality of the organs. There is an alternative to this. So if we're not going to do NRP, what can we do? Well, there's single organ pumps available for every organ now. We could pump each organ individually. The problem with this, the major problem I have with this, is it's cost prohibitive. So it's a lot of cost for each organ. NRP addresses all the organs either in the abdomen or all the organs in the thorax and in the abdomen with one pump run. You spread those costs amongst all the organs, and it gives you just the same benefit. So that's why my approach was really to go after NRP. There's different types. The type that I went to my hospital to ask for approval with is abdominal NRP, which is that where we're just going to work in the abdomen. We're going to do it exactly the same way we're doing a traditional DCD donor, and there's really no perceived ethical considerations or problems with this method. So this is kind of straightforward, and that's why I wanted to start with this. That's what my abdominal team wants. My thoracic team isn't ready for organs yet, so we're not going to talk about that. But this is really relatively straightforward. Now, occasionally, people have talked about putting femoral cannulas in. We are not asking for that because we feel that we can cannulate like we always do, and it's not a problem. If the donor has pre-existing femoral cannulas, we will use them. But otherwise, we're not going to cannulate the donor ahead of time because we don't want to intervene on a donor until they've expired. The other type of NRP is the thoracoabdominal one. This is where there's some potential ethical concerns. I don't think that they are real, but this is where the controversy is, and it does need to be addressed because once somebody brings this up, you have to be able to discuss this and to shut it down and allow this technology to go forward. The issue really is, for those who aren't aware, and Greg alluded to this, when you cannulate in the chest, you do clamp the vessels to the brain, and that has been perceived as an ethical concern, and I will discuss where that came from. So really, the question really becomes, are we violating circulatory death when we do this? Are we causing donor harm with brain reanimation or not? And are we threatening the stakeholder trust that we've established in organ donation? And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. So this is typically what a DCD donor looks like on the top, which is we let them expire, there's a waiting time, we go in quickly, we flush the organs out and procure the organs, which, by the way, we never disclose to donor families what we actually do in the operating room, but when we do NRP, we are disclosing what we do in the operating room because we want to be fully transparent with how this process looks. The more transparent we are with this, there's less concern for controversy, less concern for ethical issues to be raised. The only difference with NRP, after that 2 to 5 minute waiting time, we put the patient on the NRP, we allow the organs to be reperfused for an hour or two, and then we do a traditional procurement. Again, we are introducing safeguards to prevent reanimation, which is the ligation of the vessels, and the question is that a concern or not? So, you know, the question that was raised is, are we altering death by putting the patient back on the machine, and are we doing something by ligating these vessels? And that was the only concern that has been brought up, is whether we're preventing reanimation or we're reanimating a heart. And a lot of this is kind of unfounded. And a lot of all of this discussion predominantly came from one paper. And this was published in the American College of Physicians. This brought up this controversy. The major problem with this paper, it's not a peer review article, and there's no authors. So the person or people who wrote this paper were afraid to attach their name to this. And there has been other concerns raised about whether they had other reasons why they wanted to shoot down NRP. I can't really go into that, but this is the main paper that brought this up into question. And again, non-peer reviewed, no author attached to this. So has this been discussed elsewhere? Well, it's been discussed everywhere in the world. And these are just sample articles that have been published around the world about NRP. And everyone seems to understand that this is okay to proceed with this, that there's no ethical concerns. But in the United States, there's a lot more controversy over this than the rest of the world. But we have to address it. So the American Society of Transplant Surgeons has addressed it, and they've come out with a position statement. And they've discussed the 3 fundamental principles related to autonomy, non-malfeasance, and beneficence. And I'll go through those. So you have to respect autonomy. So again, nothing has changed with the way we are treating the donor. We are going to allow the donor to expire in the way with the traditional comfort measures. It's 2 separate events that we're talking about. We're going to treat the patient as a person and give them comfort care at the end of life. We're going to allow the withdrawal of care, and we're going to separate that event by a period of time between them and then the organ procurement. Non-malfeasance, so we have to make sure that there's no harm to the donor. Well, again, this donor, by the time we're doing any interventions, these donors have died. And we've waited an additional 2 to 5 minutes to make sure that not only have they died, there's not been any evidence of auto-resuscitation, and that everyone in the room understands that these are two separate events occurring to the same person. And really, the last thing is beneficence, which is making sure that the risks are minimized and the benefits are maximized. Well, there's no direct benefit to the donor because the donor has died. There is direct benefit to all the potential recipients that that person is helping at the end of their life. So this continues to be true. So these ethical concerns where people have alleged that the heart is reperfused in the body, and it brings back the question of irreversibility, the concern over ligating the vessels. This is all things that people need to be aware about and be able to discuss. And ultimately, we have to separate the fact that this is not reanimation. This is perfusion of individual organs. Just like we would take out the organs and put them on an OCS device, this is just perfusion of organs in situ. The clamping of the vessels is to prevent any flow to the brain, but death has already been declared. So our approach, we went for ethics approval first in our health system. Then I went to our medical advisory committee, and as I said to you, they asked me like, what do you want? Like, why are you coming here for approval? And I'm like, you are the most senior physicians in our health system. When there's a concern, they're gonna come ask you questions. And you need to have heard about this ahead of time. And then this approval process actually went all the way up to our health system governing board. So everyone is aware that we're doing this and has bought into this. We have re-educated our operating room staff. We prepared education for when we go to other hospitals. And again, as I said, our approach is to educate and get approval before we started doing this. And in summary, the NRP has the potential to increase organ quality and utilization. Ethical considerations have been raised, especially only with thoracoabdominal NRP, not with abdominal ones. We've provided the education. We've written practice guidelines about this. We're fully transparent. And I think this is ethically permissible if with all this disclosures and all this understanding and education, and we have agreed that we will be completely transparent with this, not just with the hospitals and the healthcare staff, but with the patients and the donor families as well. Thank you.
We're going to go with our last speaker on the agenda at this time. Kathryn Gray has been a perfusionist for 23 years and is the director of perfusion at the Hospital of the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. Kathryn is an active member of the Hospital Ethics Committee, is Yellow Belt certified, and is a faculty member and mentor of the AMSECT Leadership Symposium. Outside her professional endeavors, Kathryn loves to travel and is a passionate conservationist. She is a co-founder of a nonprofit organization dedicated to rhino conservation and supporting the community efforts in keeping them safe. Please help me welcome Kathryn to the podium as she helps us learn how to support the team doing these procedures with her presentation on How Do I Support It? Staffing, Pay, Coverage, and Challenges.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I promise that I did not look at Greg or Dr. Cohen's slides before I created mine, but you're going to see a lot of the same information. Just some disclosures. I do provide consultation for Keystone Perfusion Company for their NRP services. I do sit on an NRP task force with the Association of OPOs, and a lot of the information that you're going to see in terms of transplant data was given to me by our local OPO, the Gift of Life. So essentially, in the country, there are organ procurement organizations that have facilitated over 50,000 organ harvests across the country. There are 56 OPOs within the US. The challenge we face is that there's just not enough organs. This is total organs of 104,000 total patients waiting, and only 5,000 are just in my region. Now, breaking out DCD patients, specifically donation after circulatory death, there is 36% of transplants right now that are all DCD. This should look a little familiar. You can see that since our first donation after circulatory death in 1995, the number of DCDs have progressively increased. Our success with DCD is a reflection of several factors. Because of an increased public awareness of futility of life-saving treatment for dying patients, families are more inclined to withdraw support. Sorry, the screen went out. The families are more inclined to withdraw support when they know death is imminent. Because of the hospital's timeliness of organ referrals, this has increased the opportunities to be on site early to reevaluate these patients for DCD. Another breakdown of DCD experience, kidneys are being the highest transplanted, but in recent years, hearts, lungs, and livers have increased, and in part due to the processes that help facilitate the procurement. Dr. Cohen talked about the difference between abdominal and thoracic. Abdominal is where the heart does not start, and thoracic is where the heart will be reanimated. So now we're going to take a look at the current landscape and the programs that institutions are developing. NRP is a procedure that is instituted after the declaration of circulatory death. The benefits of NRP include minimizing ischemic time, maximizing viable organs, and extending time between procurement and transplantation. Depending on approach, whether abdominal or thoracic, the patient's blood volume is supported by an extracorporeal device over a period of time. Lab values are corrected and trended. Visible evaluation of the organ continues throughout the procedure until a decision is reached on whether or not to proceed with the harvest. Studies are being shown that the success of NRP with a graft survival rate of 71 to 95%. So our experience at Penn, we started the program of NRP in 2021 and do them for liver transplants only. Our liver team has also recently asked Perfusion to assist with the organox usage and maintenance. Last year alone, we performed over 180 liver transplants, and programs like this will likely increase that statistic. Heart and lung transplant surgeons at Penn would also like to extend this into heart and lungs with NRP, while also adopting machine perfusion such as ex vivo for long-distance offers and utilizing Paragonix coolers to maintain a constant temperature for an extended period of time. On the cusps of all of this, we are also building a donor care center that will allow for DCD patients to be brought to Penn for DCD processing. So how have I done this? Just barely. Just when I think I have a reliable plan, things change. But early on, here are some glaring things that we needed to address. Staffing. Greg spoke to it. We will talk about it more. I have 26 staff members. We do 2,000 hearts, 180 livers, and oversee multiple cardiac responsibility. I'm still not sure how I'm able to mobilize a person to travel outside for an undetermined amount of time. Equipment. We considered all options, but I'll go through the decision process shortly. Cost, scheduling, and responsibilities. We constantly have multidisciplinary meetings that outline expectations, the who's and the whys. And lab requirements. I'd be very curious to talk to you guys about the lab requirements. This is the basis of these cases, and it has been a challenge. I've spoken to dozens of you on the phone that really outline the challenges of taking on lab responsibilities outside of your home hospital. So this is a brief schematic. Again, Dr. Cohen went through this for the DCD donation. A patient is extubated and the warm ischemic time begins. As the blood pressure falls below the determined threshold, we move into a functional warm ischemic time. At the time of systole and declaration of death, there is a 5-minute no-touch period. After that, organ preservation can begin. What we have learned over time is the need to evolve and make the hard stops more fluid-based upon the patient's activity. We started with a functional warm ischemic time of 30 minutes, but we now extend that up to 45, depending on blood pressure and heart rate. This is just a schematic of what our basic protocol was as we were building this program. Essentially, on the left-hand side, it really is the breakdown of what is going on with the NRP, but it also mimics what we are doing at the home hospital of when we're calling our recipient, when we're calling to the OR, and when we're actually getting started. Knowing that these procedures may not result in organ retrieval 100% of the time, we wanted to be financially responsible in choosing our equipment. Also, anticipating multiple teams and activity at the field, we didn't want to choose a closed system that risks air entrainment. So we created a circuit using the Biomedicus BioConsole pump. And we certainly have evolved. It's important to note, we are only supporting local cases and do not fly to outside hospitals. So originally we were limited space to pack our gear and use the outside hospital for tables and tanks and anything that a standing operating room would have. Since then, we've settled on a sprinter cart that we take with everything we need. This is essentially a checklist for my team, and we've really kind of evolved on how to use this, but to the point of those pictures, we definitely take more than one of everything. We try to minimize and not take the kitchen sink, but as you kind of have to be your own party. So we really do try to streamline, but it's a lot of equipment. One of the greatest anxieties that I hear from my teammates is that they do not know how to anticipate these cases and that they're not sure how to mobilize and really be functional outside of their home hospital. We've created a tip sheet to better arm them with the procedure of what the procedure entails and how to best navigate those challenges. We really rely on each other and our teams to make this process professional and respectful. As we are planning a case, there is a formal virtual meeting to make sure all details are organized, such as NRP approach, whether family members will be present in the OR, accepted time periods for warm ischemic time, and anything that the team requires, like lab support, blood in the room, how we're setting up the room, etc. This actually is driven by our OPO and will connect all of the team members on a Zoom conference to make sure that we're all on the same page. Perfusion parameters, these are just, Greg had gone through these are some of the things that we are looking at while we start NRP. Patient is heparinized with 30,000 units. These patients sometimes take quite some time to expire, so we're always putting 10,000 more in the pump. We're doing blood gases every 15 minutes. We also travel with a research assistant that also needs labs, so it's essentially pulling labs. The iStat's done, we're running another one. We maintain temperature and we're looking for normal pH, and our threshold is a hematocrit of greater than 25%. We do use a lot of blood on these cases. So staffing. Being asked to do this presentation a few months back, I was really confident that I had valuable information to share with you all. Today I stand here admitting that it has become a day-to-day challenge. I've reached out to some very successful programs that this chart is showing. I blacked out institution names for just privacy's sake, to get their perspective, and there's some commonalities. The first and foremost is that we're all just winging it. These procedures take time, average to 8 to 12 hours, and although these are more controlled than an emergent type A, you have to plan to lose that resource for an extended period of time. Is an extra layer of call needed for these? Maybe. The challenge is that staff want a work-life balance, and adding extra call is not going to be embraced. So do you incentivize? Currently, our number is low, And so I haven't broken this out of our call responsibility. Whether we move forward and build on this, I think that's one of the challenges that I need to face. Do we incentivize? One of our surgeons, one of our liver transplant surgeons, has had a wonderful conversation with me recently about going to our CFO and talking about how to do this differently. You know, I think that these are a layer of cases that we need to be sending our experts, and I think that I am fortunate enough to have the champions to say, let's figure out how to do this differently. So what have we learned? You know, I think that we have moved the needle on how long we're going to wait for these patients to expire. Again, we're only doing livers, so it's about a 45-minute wait for us, and then we will pack up and go. I think that we have originally started to set up our system in the room with the lines up and ready to go, but then we realized, well, when patients' families are there and they don't expire, we're trapped until they leave to get our equipment. Costs, these are expensive. We are sending a surgeon, a perfusionist, a PA, research assistants, and we are all trying to look at what else we can do to make this very much more cost effective. And staffing, I think that this is where I kind of come to you guys and say, how do we fix this? But this is why we're doing it. So this is Jared, and he was a 17-year-old that was diagnosed with metachromatic leukodystrophy. He was admitted with acute rhinovirus and ventilator-associated pneumonia. He was tried to be extubated 3 times without success. NRP was used, and he was able to donate his heart. And here is his recipient. They have been on several interviews, and she just ran her first 10K and donated it to her donor. So history repeats itself. This is actually, I believe Greg used this as well. This is the first heart transplant in Cape Town, and this is truly the operative note, and they did use a form of NRP. So we will continue to evolve, but it's beneficial to look behind us every once in a while to see what worked. The future in transplant. I believe that as more and more programs develop, and as we continue to have a shortage of perfusion availability, we need to be creative we need to be creative to support these cases. Contract groups such as Keystone and Procure offer traveling NRP services. OPOs may look to build their own in-house service to stop the logistical challenges. I think that the opportunities will grow, and I think pardon me, my screen is moving. I think that the opportunities will grow, and it will be important to maintain these services as a perfusion-driven role. I've already been approached with, well, can't we train the fellows? Or can't the research assistant do this? It's just like ECMO. Can we send a specialist? And I think we need to support each other and own these programs. Just a helpless or a harmless plug for a wonderful website and organization. They're offering amazing webinars and are actually hosting a meeting as we're here in New Orleans on developing NRP practices. It's worth checking out. And that's all I have. Thank you.
At this time, we're going to open the floor to questions. We are having some technical difficulties with the virtual presentation.
Guys, my name. from Auckland, New Zealand. Very interesting talks, thank you so much. I'm in the process of starting an NRP program in New Zealand, and we're in the early stages of it. I'm just wondering what your line of thinking was behind the methodology of occluding the aorta for liver transplantation. I understand you can either use the clamp method or the balloon method. And what did you use, if any, what methods did you use to ensure that there is no perfusion to the brain? This is for both, all speakers.
For abdominal NRP, we're using the Coda balloon. And we don't ensure there's no perfusion, but it appears that the circuit is intact in the abdomen. So we don't actually measure anything in the chest.
Yeah, we have no way of really knowing if there is no blood going up into the head vessels, but they do take, right in the beginning, once the chest is open, they do definitely visualize the arteries to the brain and make sure that they have their clamp all the way across, and that in theory there should be nothing getting through.
Thank you.
Hi, Luke Bose from Iowa City. I applaud your efforts, and I think this will be this is a great way to get more organs. I just wanted to know if I see some practices like putting mannitol in the priming. I see we just give more heparin just to make sure. I see that you do a full sweep gas with 100% FiO2, which are all practices that have been described as, or as at least researched as being detrimental for some organs. And like mannitol, we know it's not good for the kidneys. Is there any research that is going to be done on this? And just as an interest, not as an opposition against NRP.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're collecting as much data as we can on these patients and the recipients and the function of the organs. We are kind of flying by the seat of our pants on doing these procedures right now. There's not a lot of real scientific data. Even though in Europe it's been going on for a long time, there's still very limited data on this. We are prospectively collecting all of our data.
Thank you.
David from Baton Rouge. When you go to do a procurement like this with centers heart centers that do not do transplantation, have you considered using the in-house staff to help instead of having to haul all your stuff from here to there?
Mostly it's hard to depend on the donor site, and a lot of times they don't want anything to do with it. Kind of like what you were alluding to with even just trying to get a blood gas or something. The nurses from the donor facility are pretty much run for the hills. So to say that you would rely on them for their supplies, we just prepare that it's going to be all on us, and don't even attempt to utilize them for any resources really.
I agree.
In terms of perfusion, at least, yes.
You have to be self-sufficient.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, Dan from MGH. My question was about the timing, and does NRP similar? We only do OCS right now. Do you wait any longer than our warm ischemic cutoff is 30 minutes for the hearts? I know we talked a lot about livers today, but it seems livers are pretty strict too on the 30 minutes. Does it kind of affect your warm ischemic waiting time, or is it still the same?
You say was that for hearts?
For both, I guess.
We're only doing livers, so I mean, we're pretty strict. We started very strict of 30 minutes and then we'd walk away. We have definitely seen, depending on patient activity, I mean, we've had patients where we extubate, they have a normal heart rate and they have normal sats for a very long time. So then we tend to start extending that 30 minutes, but we have a hard stop at 45.
So we look at functional warm time, which is when either the SAT or blood pressure drops below 80. and that's when our clock starts ticking, and we go 30 minutes from there. But that time prior to that functional warm time starting may be 20, 30 minutes. So we don't start the clock until it really drops.
Thank you.
Chet Sablika from Comprehensive Care. We're working with a couple of OPOs, one in Phoenix, the other one in Colorado. One of the things we're doing is we're working with Talus Medical to make sure the driver connections for the electronic capture of the data is there, because I think it's vitally important. I think, you know, the whole reason we're doing this is to not have modeled organs arriving at hospitals, right, for transplant, and even recording, you know, the type of solutions we're using, the prime, pressures, et cetera. I think it's going to be really important that, you know, for us as the perfusion professionals, that we're capturing that data and sharing that data with each other to make sure that we're delivering the best care we can. And capturing in a digital format, I think you will all agree, it's pretty important. And if you guys need some help, you know, setting that up, we're more than willing to make those connections for you as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Harry McCollin, Cedars-Sinai, Los Angeles. First of all, wonderful presentation. I do believe this is probably the future of expanding the donor organ pool for these really sick patients needing organ transplant. We experience a lot of blood loss when we procure these patients' organs, especially if we're doing dual organ procurements, heart, liver, things like that. And we have a cell saver that we use with the circuit to minimize transfusion. Have you guys considered anything like that in your guys' approach when you guys go out on these runs?
We have not. I mean, I do think that we are taking the kitchen sink, then that would add the refrigerator too. You know, we are strapped with how much we currently, at least for us, we're only sending 1 to 2 people out. So that's a lot to handle in terms of mobilizing equipment. So we haven't yet. We have a standard approach of asking for 6 units of blood to be available at the outside hospital. But if we could find vendors, if we could find a mobile and small cell saver, that could be good.
Thank you very much.
We've also kind of thought of, we don't have necessarily a pump sucker in place, but we've kind of thought we could set up a separate cardiotomy with attached suction from the donor facility that we could separate out from the main circuit and then maybe dump it into our CPB reservoir if needed, but I didn't really want to tell my surgeons that yet.
We do that.
Yeah, and I think the other trick is really to do minimal dissection before you go up on pump, right? So it's not like a traditional DCD donor, and it's not even like a brain dead donor. You really want to be thoughtful about what you're cutting and really minimize any dissection other than what you need to do to cannulate. And I think that's important.
And to that point, I think we've been in situations where we're coming in for NRP for liver and abdominal, and we have another team that's taking the lungs, and they didn't tie anything off, and we were losing a ton of blood in the chest, and we were struggling. So it really is a collaboration of teams that we all need to be communicative.
Zach Gorman from Iowa City. My question is for Greg. I recently had my first DCD donor, and we were doing the OCS, and it was kind of a mad rush to get the heart out. So when going on NRP, so you're going to reperfuse, and then once that heart is ready to come out, is it just a clamp and cut, or do you flush, or do you do anything before you put it into cold storage?
I think we're not involved with the OCS, but I think they still, we haven't done NRP to OCS yet. I was just alluding to hope maybe in the future, because when bringing that up, we had a OCS that we were involved with the other day, and the surgeon told me it took almost an hour from time to harvest to get on the OCS device. And so they had a viable heart that was non-viable after that. So that was just my suggestion for hopefully in the future, maybe, you know, they can coincide and start with the NRP, and then if it is a long distance that they anticipate, then they can move to OCS after the NRP and everything was stabilized from then.
Okay. And to follow up on that, so just for like clarity, so once you're on the NRP and you're reperfusing, you said about 60 to 90 minutes you reperfuse those organs?
No, usually we're only on pump for about 45 to 60. They can usually make a pretty good determination for the heart, at least. I know sometimes they might want longer perfusion for the abdominal organs. Ours is typically about 45 to 60 minutes where the surgeon can determine if he wants it or not. And so, yeah, it's usually not too much longer than that.
And then, sorry, lastly,
Sure.
can you just kind of walk through like what's it like coming off pump, and then how does it go from there?
Sure. Yeah, it goes pretty smoothly, almost like basically terminating a normal heart, and so it goes pretty quickly. I don't think I've done one where we procured and they weren't able to reintubate, so they always had the lungs working at that time. So I was able to come off easily. Yeah, the one issue I had was with what I talked about, transfusing whatever you had in the reservoir, because, I was trying to communicate with the surgeon. I was like, okay, do you have enough blood? Because, I'm going to start tearing down and start, packing up and stuff. And so I had, the centrifugal pump out of the driver and all this stuff. And he's like, oh, we need some more volume and stuff. I was like, I'm already breaking down. But I just had to, put it back together real quick and transfuse. But it just comes with the time and communication and learning. When you do more, it gets easier, but just those little hurdles.
Hi, I'm Ashley with Golden Gate Perfusion, Ashley Riso. I work in San Francisco. We had a couple new heart transplant surgeons come aboard about maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago on our team, and we've entertained the idea of starting a DCD organ procurement program. One of the big questions that our group had, and probably something that would greatly influence my decision. I'm curious, Greg, if you guys have discussed this, or Kathryn, if you've thought about it. Do you guys have life insurance, or does your health insurance actually cover you on procurement runs? Because to my understanding, health insurance does not cover you when you're working.
Yeah, I don't recall, honestly.
So I can speak to that. So our health system and our Transplant Institute has specific insurance coverage for anyone who goes out on a procurement, whether it's a car or a plane. We have a specific rider for that.
I better double check.
Yeah, I want to say that ours does not, although, we had the same conversation when we were looking to, we do mobilized ECMO, so we're flying with our Penstar, mobile team. But it's definitely worth something to consider.
Thank you.
Hi, Mike Longo, Vanderbilt University Medical Center. We do a bunch of NRPs, DCDs. You had mentioned about the suction, or not lack of suction on the circuits. We actually, what we'll do is we'll throw off suction lines and have them clamp at the field, and we're using vacuum. So we're able to, when they need to clear the field, pop the clamp up there. Sometimes surgeon will say, well, I can't do that, so we'll do it back there. That's just one thing. Another thing is
Was that vacuum just to the reservoir? Sorry.
Yes, just the reservoir. We do have a regulator, but we take, so we don't bring a blender with us, but we do bring a regulator with us for vacuum.
Okay.
And we take the oxygen off the anesthesia machine, and we grab the vacuum off the anesthesia machine. Once so we're able to do that, and we go on 10 liters, 100%, like yourself. And we've had fairly good results.
Yeah.
Another thing is we take 2 people on the procurements. I think it's really important, meaning that the equipment's heavy, and at least in our organization, we're not getting any younger.
Yeah.
So, and everybody scatters when the equipment needs to be lifted from the van to the ground to the van.
Yep.
There's only the perfusionist that's doing it. So that's all I had to say. Yeah. Thanks.
We've been lucky, sometimes even our surgeon will help us, and we're like, oh, careful your hands, but they will help load.
I'd like to echo that. But Katie, I had a question about the point of care testing that you mentioned. Are you struggling with blood gases or ACTs, or are you?
So not so much struggling at this point, but when we first started the program, point of care testing, our department was very much against me taking out our equipment out of the hospital because of CLIA licensure. And so I've kind of queried as many people as I could of how are you doing it? There was a conversation that I had with an institution that said, the stance that we take is when we are doing those blood gases, it is technically not a patient, it is a solution because that patient has a death certificate. So it doesn't have a patient to get associated with. So it really is just the logistics. We've now gone the route of getting our own CLIA license for our equipment so that we could be, just checking all the boxes.
Our kind of solution to that was we have like research iStats that are kind of separate from that entirely. Like they don't even upload to a patient server at all.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, we had the same issues with the CLIA license, and we're on a track. I think we have to do competencies quarterly, but nobody wants to really oversee it, and it's, still an ongoing struggle.
Hey, Rachel Gambino from Duke. My question is for Greg, because you're doing hearts. So you said that you guys typically, if it's more than 30 to 60 minutes, you won't take the heart. Do you guys still try to go on, or do you just abort?
No, just abort.
Okay.
And then they just, they'll take them for comfort care outside the room. We'll wait till it's 60, sometimes 90. I think in the beginning too, when we had a lot of failures to expire, they were kind of like, oh, just wait a little longer, but it's like, what are we really doing at that point? Just appeasing people back at home, so.
Yeah, I totally understand that. So for context, I do NRPs for pediatric hearts. Mm-hmm. And we've been, as long as the centers will let us go, we've still been going on because our surgeon has the mentality like, you might as well try, and the heart's gonna tell us if it's okay to transplant or not. Mm-hmm. You could do a clamp trial and you could see how it goes. So we recently pushed it a little bit past 2 hours, mm-hmm. and so the center let us go to 2 hours, and that heart did great. So it's just another perspective. It is peds, so it might be a little bit different, but we like to at least still try because we already burned the circuit anyway.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, glad to hear that.
We have a virtual question for Dr. Cohen. What great presentation, and have you ever had a donor family raise the ethical concerns listed when offering education or obtaining consent? And then, do families seem to be under the impression that reanimation will potentially reverse death after declaration, or do the concerns come from the healthcare professionals that you're working with?
So the discussion about donation and NRP with DCDs is all done by our OPO staff. And as a transplanter and as our transplant team is not involved directly with the family, so I've not had that raised because we don't see the family. We've worked with our OPO to prepare the right education. I haven't heard that being raised.
And then anything from the professionals, healthcare professionals in the room or your colleagues?
We've done a lot of DCDs in our state, and I think most people have been exposed to this already, and this is just a modification of what we've been doing. We haven't had any additional questions raised. I worry about it, and that's why I went to the ethics people ahead of time, but we haven't had any additional concerns.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Kind of a side note from that, I think they will present DCDs. I know some of our OPOs, NRP too. I think even some of our DBD patients, I had a patient that was technically DBD, but the family wanted to do DCD with NRP style. So I don't know, that's something they're offering to them too, which was kind of weird. So obviously he expired super quick and it was nice and easy, but I think the family wanted him to expire on his own and not take his organs while he was still technically, alive. Well, not alive, but ventilated.
And then one more question for Dr. Cohen. Could you comment on the variability of the hands-off period after cardiac arrest, the 2 to 5 minutes?
Yeah, so initially the Institute of Medicine said there should be a 5-minute waiting time between the two events. Then they subsequently would change that to 2 minutes, but it actually depends on the individual hospital policy. And there are hospitals, there's plenty of hospitals around the country that still have maintained that 5-minute waiting time. We don't think that is significant enough to cause us to hesitate.
Are there any other questions? Thank you all for this great session. If you want to speak with the speakers afterwards, I'm sure they would love to speak with you. So thank you and have a great afternoon.